Hello, I'm Dynasty Demir. Whenever they show Liberia, they never show this part. The beautiful beaches, blue water. They never show this part. Just the Ebola. Now, we were discussing colonialization,
Yeah.
and was Liberia colonized? Because the argument is, since the ACS, I guess, brought the slaves or newly freed slaves over here, that means that Liberia was colonized.
Well, actually, Liberia was not colonized by any superpower.
Okay.
It was not colonized. Liberia declared early independence, but colonization.
So the question is, independence from who?
Liberia didn't get independence from anybody. Liberia was established. The country Liberia was established by free slaves from America in 1821.
Okay.
Well, we didn't go under the leadership of any colonial power. After the abolition of slavery, there was a need for these people to come back and resettle. They were Africans. America didn't want the blacks to be so prevalent in their country. So they thought it wise, people got together and thought it wise to go out and scout for a place to resettle or repatriate these free slaves. Because the slaves taken from Liberia were taken to America.
Say that one more time, because the argument too is that even though the slave trade was going on pretty much on the whole west coast of Africa, some people will say that the slavery wasn't taking place in Liberia. But you're saying that slave trade was active even in Liberia.
Slave trade were more active in Liberia and Nigeria. Because
Oh, wow.
these were places where slaves were taken in abundance, taken from in abundance. They were carried all there. But most of the Liberian slaves were settled in Southern America. Precisely California, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, those areas in the southern states. There where they were settled. And after the abolition of slavery, these people were brought and settled back here. But were never colonized. The ACS that was founded in 1816 was put together for the purpose of repatriating and helping these free black slaves to settle. It was just an NGO. And this NGO got support from the American government. That doesn't necessarily mean that America colonized Liberia. You see. So when they felt that they could stand on their own, they came out and made the organizers of the ACS, those who were at the hierarchy of the ACS, to know that they had reached a stage to do business on their own. So they declared independence because of the encroachment on the territory of Liberia by other foreign powers. Because once you have your sovereignty, people will respect you. They will not trouble bother your territorial rights. So after lands were taken from the northern part of Liberia through Guinea, because Great Britain colonized Guinea, Great Britain colonized Sierra Leone, and lands were being stolen at that time by Great Britain, the eastern part and the northern part of Liberia. The western part and the northern part of Liberia, the eastern part was being encroached upon by the French. Ivory Coast. There was no way, even then, if the carrier report to the League of Nations, then there was no redress. So they decided, since we cannot get any redress from the world out there, we'll declare independence to hold our own sovereignty, to let the world know that we are a country on our own. Mm. So they declare.
So then again, the question is: so what was Liberia prior to independence? Because the question is sovereignty from who? That's what people keep asking. Sovereignty for who?
You see, independence from whom? As I said before, you don't have to be under the power of somebody before you can get independence. They were under nothing. They were being helped by those who established them, who helped to repatriate them to come to Liberia here. They were given remittances from the American Colonization Society. They came and established them here, and they established them in Sierra Leone first, before they came back here through the instrumentality of Ralphie Stockton and Eli Aries. They came here to look for a suitable place to bring the colonies. Because after the establishment of the ACS in 1860, the first president, Woodrow Washington, there were guidelines put on the books for the protection of these people who were repatriated. But they came in 1820 on the ship February 6 from the port of New York. They landed here in Sierra Leone the 9th of March in 1820. There were effort made for them to get a living place, but that effort was refuted by the then governor of Sierra Leone, Charles McCarthy. So Governor McCarthy refused them a piece of land. They finally came to Sherbrooke in 1818 with Samuel J. Mills and Ebenezer Burgess. They were sent to scout our land to repatriate these people. When they entered, they couldn't get any go ahead from the British government. They went to on the island of Sherbrooke, and they were helped by a former British, one of the first free British slaves, John Kissel. He managed to link them up with King Sherbrooke, and they were able to buy a parcel of land, Sherbrooke Island. There they lived until problem broke out. They started getting sick, and because of the unsanitary health condition at Sherbrooke, they were repatriated to Liberia. But before repatriation, two of the agents at the time, Ralphie Stockton and Eli Aries, came to look for land. And they met with 6 African kings. And they were able to buy the mainland where Maria stands now.
Okay, so the land, Providence Island, that's where they came in contact with the kings, yes or no?
Yes, Providence Island, where they landed, but they only landed there and used that place as a resting place until they constructed their buildings on the mainland.
Okay. So the argument is that even though they negotiated and bought the land, people will say that the ACS was heavily involved, and therefore they somehow tricked the kings into giving the land to the new free black slaves. Is there any truth to that? Can you?
They didn't give the land freely. The land was not given up freely. When these people left Sherbrooke because of malaria, these 86 original free slaves that came and landed on Sherbrooke, they died. Most of them died because of the malaria. So these agents were able to come and look for a suitable place. When they came and negotiated and paid for the land, December 11, there was a meeting convened. December 11, 1821, there was a meeting convened between the 6 African kings in Liberia here and the negotiators, Eli Aries and Ralphie Stockton.
Okay.
They came up to an agreement after 4 days of convention. December 15, the deal was signed and handed over to them. That brought about the date of the establishment of Liberia. December 15, 1821. They finally left to go and bring these colonies down from Sherbrooke. They landed here in 1822, in 1822, January 7th, that we refer to originally as Pioneers Day. That's the particular date, and they landed in Liberia. When they landed here, they settled on the island of Dozo, D-O-Z-O-E. Dozo, that was the name given to Providence Island by the natives. So you can squat here until you complete the construction of your buildings on the mainland that you people are paid for. But before then, when Aries and Stockton left to go and repatriate the people, problem broke out behind them. But there was a very influential chief called King Saboso.
Is this King Peter or no?
King Peter was amongst the chiefs that sold the land.
Okay.
Amongst the chiefs we had King Peter, King Governor, King Jimmy, King Long Peter, King Yoda, and King Freeman. The 6 chiefs. They had 2 Peters there. They sold the land. And when the people left to go and bring the colonies from Sierra Leone, problem broke out. Said, oh, we cannot give the people the land. But through the intervention of King Saboso, who was present in this meeting, things became fruitful. So you can't do things like that. You people have received money for this land. The people didn't come to take it by force. You all sold the land to them. Then you all decided not to give them the land. You all looking for trouble. He said there was a military encounter between me and your old King Peter who was here before. Now, beheaded him. If you all get problem, you don't give the people the land that they paid for, I will do the same thing to you.
I guess the story is somebody from the ACS or some white Navy commander from the U.S. came and held somebody at gunpoint. That's what they say, and forced someone to sign the agreement to.
It's a blatant fallacy.
Okay.
It's a blatant fallacy. There was a British mulatto guy who served as an interpreter between the natives and Eli, Aries, and Ralphie Stockton. When the land was sold, they received the money.
Yeah, Stockton. Stockton was the name.
They wanted to sell it. So they wanted to reject the agreement.
Oh, okay, got you.
So, but you take them, Peter told them, you finish taking the people money. Then you don't want to get any land. So where will they stop when they come? Say, you don't do that. You try from, I will treat you all as I did during my last visit to this coast. He was from upper, lower County, Bapulo. So his intervention brought peace. The people came after buying the land December 15, 1821. They arrived January 7, 1822, with the first batch to settle for the first time in Liberia. But originally they first settled in Sierra Leone. They came on the ship Elizabeth. They were 86, and they had John P. Bankston as governor, agent. Then they had Samuel Bacon, first agent. Then they had Samuel A. Crosser as physician. They were the first administrators for the first group that settled in Sierra Leone before being repatriated to settle in Liberia. Yeah, they came on the ship Elizabeth in 1820. They took out February 26, 1820. They reached Cherbourg March 9, 1820. And they finally settled here January 7, 1822. It was part of our holidays. But January 7, 1822 and December 1st, 1822 were omitted from the Constitution. They were holidays. But people saw that they had no significance. They omitted it from our holidays. So they settled on the island of Doso, And they told God, thank you. Perseverance. Say we have struggled, and finally they are successful. They named the island Perseverance. Later, who gave them the perseverance of God, right? Providence. They will later change to Providence. Today, the island is existing and the name Providence is still on the island. But because of the size of the island, they couldn't inhabit a large amount of people. So this particular land, Monrovia, was bought and paid for. Finally, after spending 4 months on the island of Providence, they moved on the mainland after 4 months because they were constructing houses to move on the island.
So another
The mainland Monrovia.
So another argument that people who are, I would say, they believe that the Americos or the Congo people colonized Liberia is that since the name was Monrovia, they colonized. They named Monrovia was named after President James Monroe. Am I correct?
Well,
so they would use that as, I guess, proof in quotation marks that
the ACS was responsible for the free slaves that were brought to Liberia.
Okay.
They were under the sponsorship of the ACS.
Right.
And these people who sponsored the ACS were higher up in the American government. Mm-hmm. They sponsored the ACS. They did the ACS to take care of these people. You may believe because they were American free slaves, so America colonized Liberia. Had America colonized Liberia, Liberia would have been better than how she looks today. But the name Monrovia was not, originally was not Monrovia. During the administration of the first agent, Jehudi Ashman, Monrovia was named, the capital was named Christopolis.
Mm-hmm.
City of Christ.
City of Christ.
Okay.
But because at that time, President James Monroe was able to give them more hand, give the ACS more handout to help the people on the ground. So because of his goodwill gesture, said okay, they took the name Christopolis from on Monrovia and named Monrovia the city Monrovia in honor of James Monroe. And Monrovia was named Monrovia, the name Monrovia was given by General Robert Goodlow Harper, the same man who named Liberia in 1824. After the nomenclature changed from Christopolis, they gave it to James Monroe because he helped. He helped. Unilaterally, he helped.
Now, another argument is that the Americans came with the white man's mindset and that they enslaved the indigenous people and they implemented a system of apartheid. What are your thoughts when people say that?
I look at it as a blatant fallacy.
Uh-huh.
Because if you came somewhere and you were accepted, you will live peaceably, right?
Right.
But there was a very hard time for the settlers when they came.
Okay, now were the indigenous tribes involved in any type of slave trade, or were they beefing or warring with each other? Like when you say it was a hard time when they came, like what?
Because slavery was still going on.
Right.
When they came here, like King Bromley, his son Kaikba was still carrying on slavery with the whites. Mostly Spanish at the time now, because all of these superpowers got into the slave business. See, the people didn't have a good stay here from the origin, so they were not plentiful. There were few. And the natives tried to dominate them by waging a series of travel wars on them to exterminate all of them. And they had to stand to defend themselves because they never came to take any land free. The land was bought. They didn't bother the natives. They protected themselves. Finally, as time passed, they started to understand one another. But originally, for them to settle and rob the people, didn't actually mean to give the land. But after everything was settled, the people came, settled one and they started waging war on the people. Oh, the people here, they're not from here. They didn't come from here. How did they know that the particular land they were taken from this same area here and brought back? How did they know they came from this area? But they had already received payment for the land. So the land was justifiably for the people. And you understand? For the people, they had no, there was no act of slavery being repeated because the people knew how their forefathers work. And they all prayed for the abolition of slavery and they were free. Why should the native now in abundance come and start fighting them to exterminate all of them? They had to fight back. So your insecurity for your own life, you got to take time with it. You couldn't give yourself up. There was a series of inter-tribal wars, whatnot, because they saw that these people were more supreme than them. These people that were sold from this particular geographic origin. Yeah, they were sold. Black men all came from no part of the world besides Africa. That's a clear indication and manifestation that these people came from Africa. They came from this particular era. So
I wasn't really aware of the history. All I knew was that I was Liberian. I knew that there were 16 tribes in Liberia, you know what I mean? I knew about Liberian food. I knew how to speak the Liberian English, you know what I mean? I never spoke a dialect. My family never spoke a dialect because we're descendants of American Liberians. But I did later on find out that actually my great-grandfather was of Bassa descent. So I do have Liberian lineage. But I'm sorry, what was the question?
Do you feel as if, so the argument is, so me personally, Ethiopia and Liberia were never colonized.
Right.
Some people say Liberia was colonized. The question is, colonized by who?
Right, exactly.
Because America never claimed Liberia as a colony.
Right, well, so, not technically, but it was.
Okay.
It was. I mean, from the history I know, it was like Liberia was a part of America. Not like Hawaii and Alaska. It was never official, but technically it was.
Okay.
So I do, now that I know my history a little bit better, and that's the beauty of moving to Liberia because you learn so much more when you're on ground, I do feel as though that we were colonized. And I think that we were colonized by Americo-Liberians because that was the objective of the American Colonization Society, who sent.
Okay, so what was the objective? My understanding, the objective was there was the Negro problem in America.
Okay.
And it was like, okay, what are we going to do with these Negroes? We feel as if they're going to retaliate because of slavery. We got to take them somewhere. So the idea was, okay, I know at one time they wanted to send them to the Caribbean. So then they're like, okay, let's send them back to Africa. So from my understanding is they were just dumped in Liberia with little to no support, kind of to fend for themselves, and they were able to establish Liberia.
I feel like that's hard to believe. I feel like America very much supported this nation, especially when they started to figure out how many natural resources we had. I feel like, because even the fact that our capital was named after James Monroe, right? The original capital of Liberia was Christopolis. It was named after Jesus Christ. But the fact that the Americans had such a strong hold and such an influence over the nation, I feel as though that's the reason why they decided to name it after President Monroe. So, in my opinion, I feel as though that America knew what they were doing when they chose this place. I feel like they came and scoped it out. I could be very wrong, you know what I mean? But like, this is just my theory from what I've researched and what I've understood about our history.
Okay. So as far as the legacy of the Black Americans, because nobody really speaks about it, because you have here and you have Sierra Leone as well, where that nation was established by Black Americans, by the Creole. What should a legacy be? Because here again, whenever you bring up Liberia, it's just like sweep it under the rug. But I think it should be celebrated.
I think it should be celebrated too, but it's unfortunate that there are people who had bad experiences under Americo-Liberians, and that really just jaded their perspective. And because of that, they don't want to claim us as I don't want to say us. Can I edit that out? I don't want to say that. They don't claim Americo-Liberians as the founders of this nation. They're under the mindset that, well, not under the mindset, they are under the understanding that, Liberia already existed. The fact that...
Did it exist though?
in their mind.
Well, see, but this is the
they
issue.
did.
They make it seem as if when the Americans showed up that Liberia was one nation and all the tribes were united, which isn't
isn't
true.
true.
Right,
Which isn't true.
right.
Yeah.
So that's my issue, because it's always the Americans versus the indigenous, as far as the
Right.
indigenous were united as one tribe. When
But that's not true at all.
Right,
They
exactly.
were fighting amongst themselves a lot.
exactly.
You know what I mean? But even the fact that it says what is it? The love of liberty brought us here.
Right.
You know, many people have a problem with that because they're like, brought who? We were already here. So who did they bring here? Like, you know, you know what I mean? So, but at the end of the day, you can't deny that it was the Liberians that actually established the nation. You can't deny that it was the Liberians that, you know, really just that developed the country, because as long as the indigenous people were here, don't get me wrong, they have their customs, they have their traditions, they were doing what they were doing, but it was the Liberians that actually developed Liberia into a developed nation at the time, an African developed nation at the time, up until the Civil War.
All right,
That's
so
undeniable.
So the question is, when the Americans arrived, like you said, the tribes, they came in, they were continental tribal beasts. Some tribes were participating in the slave trade. How and the argument is, well, they didn't integrate into, you know, Liberian society when there really wasn't homogeneous Liberian society. With all that being said, how was the Liberian supposed to react?
React to
Again, the argument is, let me turn the camera on myself. The argument is when they came, you know, again, they had their English names, they spoke English, they didn't integrate into Liberian society. But when they came here, there were warring tribes, some tribes were even participating in the slave trade. How was the America supposed to react facing all that?
how were they supposed to?
Because you have some people that say that didn't happen. Like, for example, you have people that would argue, even though the slave trade was happening from Mauritania all the way to Angola, they would say, well, right there in Liberia, that wasn't happening. So you have some people that would say, well, they should integrate into the, you know, Liberian society.
Right.
But how are they supposed to when tribal beefs, some of the chiefs are already selling out to European leaders? You know, what were they supposed to do?
I mean, I think that some people could have made more of an effort to, you know, really integrate themselves into the culture, but there were people that did. You know what I mean? Like, there were people that married people of ethnic tribes or indigenous tribes. There were people that spoke. My grandmother spoke Vai and Pele fluently. You know what I mean? So, and she appreciated their culture. She learned how to cook. We all know how to cook Liberian food, like tabagi, cassava leaf, palm butter. Those aren't American foods. Those are Liberian foods, and those are things that we all know how to cook. We all appreciated learning like cultural dance and the customs and the traditions. Now, did they participate in those things? No, because they were of Christian values. So like things going to the Poro Bush and the Sandy Society, you know, Liberians. Maybe there were some that did, but majority of them didn't. But to me, I don't feel like the nation would have gotten as far as it did if the two people weren't united in some sort of way. I feel like it's a false narrative to really try to make it seem like people were just so segregated and so separated.
Right.
I think that's a completely false narrative.
Okay, so the argument is the Americans came, enslaved the natives. There was set up a system of apartheid. I mean that's what people say.
I know.
That's what people say. So
I know.
what are your thoughts when people say that?
Like I said, it's hard for me to speak on a whole because of what I was shown and what I saw with my family. My family welcomed the indigenous people. They worked hand in hand with the indigenous people. They spoke the language. They cooked the food. They connected with them. You know what I mean? Like I said, my great grandmother married a Bassa man. You know what I mean? So to me, it's a very new concept to me, and it's something I'm still learning about because it was something that I was never exposed to.
Okay, so what was Liberia before the first coup? Did you ever hear stories like what?
Absolutely.
The glory of Liberia, like
Yeah,
what was before the first coup?
It was It was Little America. That's what everybody called it. It was Little America. People used to come here for education, for healthcare. You know, it was extremely developed. That's what's so interesting when, like, my parents, when they go to places like Nigeria and Ghana now, they're in shock because they remember when
Liberia was ahead.
Exactly. Like, my mother always references how people used to come from Ghana to buy sugar and bread.
And get educated here too, as far as universities, yeah.
Right, exactly. So it was wonderful. I mean, there's so many great documentaries on YouTube where you can really see like the glory days of Liberia, a real life developed nation. You know what I mean? And it was a melting pot. You know, then that's why I think that there's the connection between Liberia and America as well. Because, for example, like, I'm not just Americo-Liberian. I'm also Sierra Leonean. I'm also Nigerian. I'm Igbo, and I'm Yoruba. Like, you know what I mean? And it's because my ancestors, they weren't having the best lives in the countries that they were in, so they came to Liberia for a better life, for advancement, for work, you know, for education. And this is where a lot of them built their wealth and built their legacies.
So what happened after the first coup? Because so when the settlers came, obviously, like you said, there was tribal beefs going on. So the question is, integrate into what? As if people speak on it as if there was already one Liberia.
There was not.
Right. So what are you supposed to integrate
up
to?
Until the boundaries of what is Liberia today were broadly drawn by the 1860s, 1870s, and then reshaped after the Berlin Conference when France and England encroached and took away, and there's documentation of that. When J.J. Roberts became president, the first trip he made was to England, and there the Archbishop of Canterbury gave him the funds after he made a speech to purchase the Galenas, which was a major slave trading area. And so Liberia took it under its national territory and then started attacking, and they gave them a gunboat. Queen Victoria gave him a gunboat to go and stop the slave trading that was going on there. So they attacked there, they drove out the slave traders, etc., etc. Couple of decades later, the British come and they take that whole area back for the crown. Forget the fact that he purchased it using funds that he got from the Archbishop of Canterbury. So, no, there was not one common group called Liberians.
Right.
The tribes here fought bitterly, and I can send you some documentations on the Kondo Federation that was at play during the 1820s and 1830s under King Salboso. They were wiping out entire tribes, one tribe versus the other. That's what Liberia was here. And so in some cases they embraced the smaller tribes, the weaker tribes, and took them in. In other cases they tried to negotiate between the tribes. But what was Liberia is a series of coastal settlements, not this great big territory that we're here. And so when people from up in Nimba say, "Oh, you didn't educate my people," geez, we didn't really have effective control of that area until the after World War I, or World War II even. So, hello. Yeah. Okay. All right. Can I speak to my son Fabio?
How you doing, Fabio? All right, so this is the Masonic Lodge in Liberia. This Masonic Lodge was established by the Americos, which were the Black Americans and the Black diaspora who came to Liberia to establish Liberia. Dukwa Hotel. Like I said, back in the day, this used to be a 5-star property. Then once the Civil War happened, it just laid to ruin. From my understanding, people were squatting here during the Civil War, and also those who were getting away from the Civil War, they would come and find shelter here. So yeah. Like I said, it used to be a 5-star property. Look up the Ducor Hotel, D-U-C-O-R, D-U-C-O-R, and you can see the pictures of how it looked like before the Civil War. It was stunning. In fact, I want to say my dad used to come and stay here when he used to come to Liberia. Like I said, it was a beautiful property, but then once the Civil War happened, it just laid to ruin. It was neglected. It still is. They need to renovate it. That's what needs to happen. It needs to be renovated. You what?
People use the place as rescue.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, during the war because.
So people will come here underground.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's where people were staying, living. They had people.
Okay.
People were drinking and all from the pool, from the swimming pool.
Drinking from the swimming pool?
Yeah.
The water?
During the war.
It's no good.
Give provisions, sell provisions to the ships that were trading in slaves. And so slave ships plied these waters up and down from where we're living, where we're sitting right now. Slave ships were quite common. So come the settlers.
Right.
And what we conveniently forget in our history is that there were two groups of white agents that were sent out by the American Colonization Society to buy land. And the first group that did a purchase, and somebody posted the deed
Right.
in Basel,
I think
the area called Buchanan now.
I think it's in the museum, is it? Did I see the deed in the museum?
No.
Okay, there was
That's not the deed I'm talking
Okay.
about. This one, it's in some collection in a library in the U.S. They purchased from the Basel chiefs and kings in that strip the land where they wanted to settle. But one of the conditions of the Basel chiefs was that the settlers would never interfere with the slave trade. That they would not be touched and they could continue trading in slaves, but the settlers could come and as long as everybody lived happily together, you let us continue trading our slaves and you can come and you can sit over there. And that was put in writing. And that was sent back to the American Colonization Society, who, of course, refused it. Then the other group came up here and traded, negotiated at gunpoint at one point because they were put at gunpoint. And they were threatened.
So we're not that told that part of the story, right?
I wasn't there. They negotiated it. They paid whatever the price was at the time, which today looks ludicrous, but they paid. And they got a piece of land, which was along Water Street or so. And when the settlers came to settle on there, they told them, no, you go over there to Providence Island. You've been to Providence Island, so you've seen it. And that deal did not have the continuation of the slave as a proviso. So the ACS, American Colonization Society, accepted that one.
May I interject real quick? All right, so the argument is since the ACS, American Colonization Society, I guess, assisted in the establishment of Monrovia, that means that Liberia was colonized. Now, I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself or not. If you want to continue or you want to... Okay, but go ahead. Okay.
I mean, yes, it was called the American Colonization Society. It was setting up a colony for free blacks. And this is the distinction. Again, with any group of people, the motivations for being involved in this colonization effort or repatriation effort or whatever you want to call it, emigration of black people of black skin and ethnicity back to Africa, different ones had different motivations. There were the Quakers who thought they wanted to abolish slavery.
Right.
There were some people who felt that free blacks were showing an example to slaves that was causing slaves to aspire to be free. sometimes some of them were afraid of blacks, some of them hated blacks, some of them really felt sorry for blacks, some of them wanted them to do the missionary thing and go and Christianize Africa. There were all kinds of motivations, and that's true. Not all good, not all bad. You can't categorize the group and say, well, this group, they were all this. That's not true. However it happened, they set up this colony here at Providence Island. In the early writings, that's one of the good things about our history, is that a lot of it is documented.
Where? Because for some reason, it's just, like I said, the
Well, there's something called the African Repository and Colonial Journal.
Okay.
I don't know if you know about that.
I don't know.
That's it went from about 1817 to about I think 1906 or something like that.
Okay.
And they kept records of everything, what the agents wrote, you know, and I have some copies and I can show them to you.
Oh, please.
I have some originals also,
Oh, wow.
but I don't have the originals here. I've lost too much here in the multiple times that I've had to leave this place.
Okay.
So I don't keep my most valuable things here. But I have, I've gotten reprints. You can get those things now on Google Docs.
Okay.
And I have them reprinted. And it's just dense information of everything. Gives lists of who came, gives entire sermons that were preached in churches in the 1820s, in the 1830s, etc., etc. So everything that I'm telling you is documented. Now, it's easy to sit from your vantage point and say, this is what motivated the people that came here. They came here to do this,
Right.
etc. But the empirical evidence is not there.
You want me to tell you an interesting story?
What?
I was doing some research this morning on, was it Robert Finley?
Yes.
You know, so I'm a graduate from the University of Georgia in Athens.
Mm-hmm.
He's buried in Athens, Georgia, and he was supposed to be the president of the school, but I guess he died right before he assumed, or he died at the end of his, 1 year he was president and he passed away. That blew my mind, because that's where I went to school at, and I know exactly where he's buried, because Jackson the cemetery is pretty much on campus. I just thought that was interesting, but go ahead.
And I know his name. I'm trying to remember his place in history. So it was just a whole bunch of different things happening here at the same time. And I've always been very proud of my ancestry.
Which you should be.
Of course, my grandparents, I grew up with my parents were divorced when I was quite young, and so I spent a lot of time with both my grandmothers, who told me stories and our family history. My grandparents, my great-grandparents, my great-great-grandparents, all public servants who did different things. They were the first this, the first that, etc., etc. We've got all of that documented. But before my very eyes, when I was born, this is the house that I was brought into as a baby. It was just
Right.
built. This whole wing was not there. This was the end of the house. It was a much smaller house. By then, they had just opened up this area of Mamba Point
Okay.
in the 10 years before, when they were building the port after World War II. And we came here to this. So I remember when they were widening the Tubman Boulevard and the infernal traffic while they were paving those streets, building those roads. I remember when a lot of the things that we take for granted, as the road to Robertsfield. I remember when it was being built. Before that, we used to go much further through Firestone to get to the airport. So there was a lot to be proud of, and you know, overnight, a new narrative started to come up, and I took me by surprise. I was in college in the U.S.
Okay.
At Michigan State.
Okay, what year?
When I went to college in 78, 1978.
So you were there with Magic Johnson.
Yes, I was. I sure was.
Uh-huh.
I was there, Magic Johnson, when they won the
Beat Larry Bird,
NC
Indiana
when they
State,
won
yeah.
the
NCAA
Big Ten,
basketball.
NCAA.
Uh-huh.
I was there. I was in my sophomore year almost. He was a year ahead of me, and I was there when he signed and went pro. And I mean, they were a common part of. I used to have photos of me and Magic Johnson, and trying to remember the names. It was him, and there was another one. They both went pro together. The other one didn't do very well. But anyway, yeah. So I was there in college, and then all of a sudden a new narrative was coming out. And I was told things about, I was like, that's not my, I didn't see that. I don't know this.
So basically,
what are they talking about?
the America being demonized didn't start to the end of the 80s or like 78. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I think there were a few attempts, and you can go back and you can find books, and I've tried to buy some of them whenever I could from antique booksellers. There was one called Top Hats and Tom Toms, where they made mockery of the society here, its aspirations or whatever. But when you go back in the African Repository, for example, and you read the speech that J.J. Roberts gave in 1845 to try to convince the Liberians that independence was the course that they wanted, and he's a fantastic figure in our history, and I don't think any book has been written about him.
Now that's the statue.
That man.
Okay, so this is the story that's told in America. He was a mulatto. I don't want to call him out his name. Sellout. That's the story.
Yeah, I mean,
you know.
you can call it what it was, but he was, as much as any one person could be, the father of Liberia.
Right.
He came in February 1829, and I know this because my Cooper ancestors came on the same ship with him.
Where did the Coopers come from in America?
They came from Portsmouth, Norfolk, and Portsmouth.
Virginia.
Virginia.
Okay.
Yeah. And he came from Virginia. He came from Petersburg.
Okay.
The ship took off from Norfolk. And he came, and immediately he started trading, and he amassed a wealth. And what happened, that's not really told, but it's there in the records if you care to, to go and do the research about
that's why I'm here.
Was he came with his boat frame and his house frame. He came with some money, and he had some trading partnerships, and he started trading and going overseas. And at one point, the American Colonization Society agents used to buy provisions, sometimes from natives, sometimes from traders, whoever. And so he used to sell them things, and then they opened an account with him, and they started owing him. At one point in time, he had more wealth than the ACS, the society here, and the agents were indebted to him. And so that gave him a power, and that's why he elbowed his way and was like, okay, well, you owe me. If I want to call my debts right now, I'll shut down the ACS here, and I'll take over this country. And so he started an agitation. I don't have details, and it's written in more flowery language than that. But amongst his friends and the fellow Virginians, they called them, because they were the ones, and started talking about self-autonomy in mid-1830s. And so from colony, Liberia became a commonwealth.
Okay, so was Liberia colonized?
Colonized by whom?
Okay, but by the ACS, working for America. Working in the interest of
And,
America.
and all of that condenses something that's much more nuanced than all of that.
Yeah.
The ACS was created by an act of Congress.
Okay.
And it received funding from the U.S. government, but it also received funding from private sources.
Correct.
So it was
Like a grant.
The British called it an NGO or
Non-governmental.
charitable
Right.
organization. And that's how they dismissed it and said, "Oh, you're just here and you set up something here. You can't call yourself a country." And J.J. Roberts was trading, and it was one of the Liberian traders whose ship was seized. No, a British trader came in, and he refused to pay customs duties in what is my mom's hometown, Edina, Grand Bassa. They had a port and they had set up things for customs duty, and he said, "Well, I'm not paying." And he got his government people in Freetown to say, "Well, he doesn't have to pay. Who are you? You're nothing but a group of people set up here by a charitable organization. We don't recognize your right to impose taxes, so we're not going to pay." So they had seized his ship for customs duty, and it was held in Edina. And so the British in Freetown seized the ship of a Liberian trader, Stephen Allen Benson, who became our second president, seized his ship in Freetown. And this was going back and forth with letters going to the U.S. asking them to intervene with the Crown and Crown Colony in Freetown to tell them, back off. These people do have the right to pay customs duty or whatever.
Now, if Liberia was technically colonized by America at that time, would they have had to pay, I guess, customs? Is that?
If Liberia was colonized by America, then those customs duties would have been going to America, but the money was going from here to America.
Right.
No, it wasn't. So, like I said, the charitable organization,
Right.
it was like a grant.
A grant, right.
They just didn't call it by those terms. So if you sit down and you put it in that kind of terminology, if you look at...
So the ACS was a nonprofit whose objective was to find land.
Yeah, well, was to find a place and help people to resettle.
For free,
so that's what they used to do. So they used to use their money to rent boats and outfit the boats and get provisions and things like that, and bring... It was a logistics company, so logistics exercise.
Are you familiar with Habitat for Humanity in America?
Yes.
Now, I'm not trying... Correct me if I'm wrong. Was the ACS similar to Habitat for Humanity?
In terms of the housing part, yes.
Okay.
In terms of the housing part, because they did stuff like that.
Right.
It was a grand scheme that I'm not sure what are good parallels for it. But when the British said, "You're nothing but a group, just a project from a group of philanthropists,
right,
where you don't have the right to impose any taxes," we had, by then we were in a commonwealth, and we had a governor, and that governor was J.J. Roberts. And he said, "Okay, well, what should we do?" And when they communicated to the ACS said, "Well, the administration is not really interested." And people like to think that of America as one administration. We're living here with Republican, Democrat. They have different motivations and at different times, America had different approaches to Liberia. It wasn't just one, "Oh yes, this group," it's like Obamacare.
Right.
The next one comes and says, "What? You're doing what? No, Congress is not going to approve any money for this." Next one comes and says, "I think it's a great idea. Congress should approve money for this." So that went on. The ACS said, "Well, we think the best thing is for you to be independent and form your own republic, and then you can levy taxes." So in this time, they tried to put diplomatic pressure on the British for the release of the ship of Stephen Allen Benson, but they sold the ship or burned it or did something. Anyway, it was no longer available. And so J.J. Roberts said, okay, well, then let's go for the independence. And so he made this speech, and not all the Liberians followed and said, oh yes, great, wonderful, we want this. Because some of them were saying, what? And then what will be the role of America? They're going to leave us? They brought us here. Not everybody that came immediately was viable, and even if you say they gave them some land and some provisions for 6 months, some of them couldn't make it. Sometimes a husband and wife would come with their children. Husband and wife would die, the children are there. Or the wife would die and the husband is there with children, or vice versa. Very, very, very many high mortality rates amongst the settlers changed the dynamics of what people were able to do and not able to do when they came here. Some of them came straight from the cotton fields or tobacco fields, having no experience with self-governance or taking care of themselves. Some of them came, like J.J. Roberts, having run businesses of their own, the free blacks. So immediately you had this stratification, economic stratification, the ones who were better educated, who were more exposed, who had some wealth when they came, like my Cooper family, the 5 brothers that came over, they came over with their house frames, they came over with their boat frames, they came over with some money, so they were better off. But my other family, I have one who was living in a Quaker society, so they came to proselytize and convert people to Christianity. I have another part of my family, my grandmother's family, they came over from Georgia as a group of slaves. So they were slaves, and then they sent them to Liberia. So they had no experience with anything else. And then you say, okay, go there, make your way. And that's why I compare it to being a refugee, because you get, when you're a refugee, you get to a country.
Sorry, go ahead.
You get to a new place, and you immediately have to find your way. You have to find what am I going to do to be able to eat tomorrow? How am I going to take care of my family? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? Nothing is laid out for you, and certainly nothing was laid out for them. And so that's part of the narrative that gets brushed under if you want to reduce it into a broad stroke of they came and they did this.
That's what it's reduced to, and
it's like saying doing that to America.
Right.
And you can't do that to America. You can't do that to any place. Just reduce it to 1 or 2 sentences that clumps everybody together. I grew up in a more privileged household here in Liberia. Like I said, this house, this is not don't claim to be the poorest of the poor, but I have many of my relatives that did not have this, and they come from settler backgrounds too. So they're tarred by the same brush as, oh, you all came with, you had all the privilege and you had all the power.
Right.
They didn't.
Okay, so the other broad brushes, the settlers came and enslaved and implemented a system of apartheid. That's the other misinformation.
Yes. They came and they enslaved. The settlers came, and almost every war that was fought here between the settlers and the indigenous people, every war that was fought up until, let's say, 1900, every war that was fought here was either a defensive war on the part of the settlers, that is to say they were attacked, or they were fighting to free slaves who were being sold.
So I have a good friend, Larry. I have a good friend, Professor Larry Davis. You'll love him. He knows the history of Black Americans and their contribution to the planet. He said that the Sierra Leoneans and Americo-Libyans were the original abolitionists in Africa.
Yeah. So There were many wars that were fought where one tribe was about to wipe out another tribe, and one tribe, what they call sued for peace, came to the American settlers and said, "Can you please help us, or can you please protect us?" Some of them were just assimilated into society. And how can you go 200 years and say this person is this? It's not even an ethnicity.
Right.
This person is a settler, a settler ancestry. I have people in my background, of course, among my ancestors who came from Nigeria, came from Freetown. My grandfather came from Germany. He was half Jamaican and half German, born in 1898 in Germany, grew up there, immigrated to
That was one source of contention, and one of the main things of the republic was slavery was banned.
Right.
It was not allowed, and so that was a serious case, and that also impugned on the sovereignty of Liberia in many cases, because the slave traders were of European origin.
Right.
And in some cases, like in Cape Mount, whatever they had, and I think it was in Paso, they had slave traders of like British origin, even though their governments didn't support them publicly, did give them support as British nationals or Portuguese nationals because of their colonial ambitions. Because they would normally use them as their representatives or their factors in that portion of the hinterland, which in certain cases Liberia laid claim to, or Liberia was trying to stop the trade into that area.
Okay. Now, you brought up colony. So the debate is, was Liberia colonized?
There was. I mean, the ACS was formed by an act of Congress, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure if that is. But it was a colonization society, and Liberia had governors who were, as first, I think 2 or 3 governors were Caucasians, hired by the colonization society. It's like the British British East Indian Company had colonies before the Crown took over, like the French I think it was the Indian company had colonies before the French government took over. It's the same thing. We had colonies that were supported by prominent figures. A colony that was supported by prominent figures in U.S. political and governmental circles, as well as. Why do you think Monrovia is named after James Monroe? Because they were grateful to him and to others in the U.S. government for the support that was given to Liberia. They were grateful for them helping to establish and found Liberia, for giving those different disenfranchised free slaves a home.
So, but the United States of America doesn't consider Liberia a colony officially.
Yeah, but if you're a nation that was a former colony that has, throughout your official diplomatic and political history, opposed colonization, you can't own up to your one little hidden colony, can you?
Okay.
And we're not angry about it or anything. It's all good. But we were colonized by the United States. We're not asking to be the 51st state. We're not asking to give us Medicare or give us Social Security. We're just saying that it's a fact of history.
Okay.
There are documents there and that prove it. And our official history also proves it. Documents in the Library of Congress that will validate what I'm saying. But that's neither here nor there at this point in our history.
Okay.
But it's just something that we have to know it's a fact, and that fact has to be acknowledged.
Okay. Even though the United States of America doesn't officially acknowledge.
I think as Bindu, I've forgotten her name. She did a documentary called Liberia, America's Step Child. So we accept that we're the stepchild,
Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. So So independence, Liberia celebrates its independence in 1847 or 1860.
1847. 1847.
Who are they gaining independence from officially?
The American Colonization Society, officially.
Okay. Now, from what I was told, when you say American Colonization of Society, it wasn't that they weren't colonizing Liberia. It's that they were bringing colonies of black people, free slaves, to, I guess, settle in Liberia. What do you?
I wouldn't agree with that.
Okay.
Because the ACS governed Liberia up to independence. Then it's not like they brought these free slaves here to, like, I'm talking about specifically about the Monrovia colony. It's not like they brought them here and they were like, okay, here are your tools, govern yourselves. They appointed the governors and officials of the colony. At some point during the development of the colony, there were certainly elected officials, but at the very outset and up to, the governors were appointed by the ACS. It was the cases for Maryland in Africa and Mississippi in Africa, which later became part of the Republic of Liberia, were founded by other societies, where like Mississippi in Africa had its origin with slaves from Mississippi.
Whoa, Mississippi and Africa. Okay.
Yeah, that's called Sino County in Liberia now, but it was Mississippi in Africa. Most of the slaves from there.
Let me ask you this: are the Hortons from? Because the reason why my former name was Albert Horton Hollis II, and I've noticed there's a lot of Hortons in Liberia and Sierra Leone. So I'm trying to figure out, and all of the Hortons were all from Mississippi. So I'm trying to figure out the connection there. Like I really want, but that's why I was asking that. But go ahead.
There are like two branches of Hortons in Liberia that I know of, but both of them are basically related.
Okay.
And I think three. There are those who came directly over as colonists, and there are those who came via the Caribbean.
Okay.
And so on. So then there are those who came. Some of them came via Sierra Leone. Because early on there was a lot of movement between Sierra Leone and Liberia, with free slaves, intermarriage, as well as migration.
Okay.
Because when Sierra Leone did not become a free state initially, there was a lot of migration of freed slaves who wanted to be freed, not want to be British citizens, who came to Liberia. And then that's where you have, like, for example, there's Edward Wilmot Blyden, who's a great historical figure when it comes to as a source for reference for the Pan-African movement, but also a thinker of the 19th century when it came to the emancipation and freedom of black peoples. And he was originally from Sierra Leone, but he migrated to Liberia, he worked for the Liberian government, with the Liberian government for years, and then eventually there was some sort of political power struggle, and he left and went back to Sierra Leone.
Okay.
So, but now you see there are Blydens in Sierra Leone, as well as Blydens in Liberia, and they're all related. And they acknowledge that relation, as well as kings and their other families also.
Okay, now, as far as Liberia goes in regards to Black American history, should Liberia be celebrated what Black Americans were able to accomplish here in Liberia?
I'll put it this way. In Liberian history, there's a lot that should be celebrated. There's also a lot that shouldn't be. But the first thing is, one thing that you should know, that at the time of Liberia's founding and around circa before the Civil War at that time, an argument was made that Africans, those of African black descent genealogy, were either not fully human, and they were not capable of self-governance, they were not capable of leading a nation, a country. Liberia belies that fact. Liberia goes against that. Liberia disproves that. That alone should be cause for celebration. Yes, there were things that didn't go right, and I think a lot of that was based on political expediency rather than maybe thought out ideology, but it was based upon survival and how we can survive and take our nation forward. That doesn't excuse it.
Right.
But Liberia should be celebrated for its contributions, and it showed many of the African nations around, and in the Pan-African struggle, Liberia played a significant role in the struggle against colonialism, but it showed many of our brothers in Guinea, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, who came here and studied our constitution, went to school, a lot of them, that Liberia was a perfect example that they could govern themselves, that they were capable, that we as a people are capable of making progress in a hostile world. Liberia was the only independent nation in Africa other than Ethiopia,
Right.
surrounded by colonial powers who constantly encroached on its territory, but they were able to maintain that integrity of its territory over the years, not through military force, but mainly through diplomatic, not diplomatic chess,
Right.
let's say,
Right.
where they were, even though portions of territory were seized. For example, there's I think it's around Ma in Cote d'Ivoire. There's and I think Taboo. There's a seal which marked the then border of Liberia. It's a monument. It's still there of Liberia in the 19th century, but the French just took those portions and added to their colony.
Right.
But those they exist in modern day Cote d'Ivoire. That was actually the part of Liberia. But it's a testament to the diplomatic acumen and knowledge of the past governments of Liberia, that they were able to maintain their independence in a very hostile environment. And that sets an example that for modern governments and for modern Africans, that you don't have to be the strongest, but you can be smart enough, you can be adroit enough, agile enough to maneuver and maintain and keep your independence.